This video will be looking at a few interesting devices that may not get their own video, but are still deserving in their own way. One of the more challenging aspects of exploring retro tech is just how broken many devices are that I get, and how much checking and research needs to be done before even starting a video. First, I've been searching for a while for a decent MP3 player for modding purposes. Here's one that I found. This is a Creative Zen 5 Plus from 2007, and it's really very small. My criteria for a good player is small or tiny, a nice design, and moddable for expanding its functions. I like the design of this, but it's also quite plastic feeling, with a very flimsy and creaky housing. It has a basic set of buttons, but it also has a line input with what looks like a record button on the side. This seems kind of unusual. I'm not sure how many MP3 players also had a recording function. I'd like to test this, but when I plug in the charging cable, while the buttons do light up, not much else happens. It's time to take this apart and see what's going on inside. There's no case screws, the housing pops off through unclipping, and the flimsy plastic sections come off one by one. And then I just need to unclip the display connector cable. This reveals the first screws holding the main board in. The main board has more chips on it than I expected. There's a Creative branded chip, which I expect is the main CPU, and this larger Phison chip, which as far as I can tell is just a flash memory controller. It's also surface mount rather than BGA. I wonder if this was a cost-cutting measure. The other large chip here would be the flash memory itself. The other side looks like it has space for a second flash memory chip. But it's the display in this device that caught my eye, because there's no obvious backlight. It turns out this is a tiny OLED screen. This was in 2007 and still in the early days for OLED technology. They had not yet become common in products at the time. I suspect this is what is broken in this player, which is disappointing because I really wanted to see this working. But then I remembered that I bought one of these colour OLED screens a long time ago. And here it is. This is one of these early 128 by 128 pixel full colour OLEDs. It's attached here to a driver board, which I have connected directly to an Arduino Mini. And powering it up, we can see just how beautiful this OLED looks with its full colour screen. Though look closely and you may notice, there are two dark horizontal lines and a green vertical line. These are faults with my display and I'm not sure when this happened. And it certainly doesn't help that it's so exposed and I'm handling it like this. Though I've noticed that when I move it around and even squeeze the flexible ribbon cable, the faults start to disappear. These OLED panels seem quite fragile. This gives me an idea of why this is starting to fail. I don't think that the flimsy housing and the way the OLED was mounted inside was a good decision in hindsight. In fact, eBay has a host of these players available. They are mostly faulty, and a black screen appears to be the most common problem. I did consider using my original display to replace the faulty display in this MP3 player. While I suspect that the OLED panels themselves are compatible with each other, they've likely been designed with different connectors for different products. The other letdown with this MP3 player is that it can't run Rockbox, which is an awesome firmware replacement for music players. If it did, I'd be very interested in getting this working, because I don't know of any devices that can run Rockbox and also have an OLED screen. And that leaves the only useful thing remaining inside this MP3 player being the battery, which still seems to be holding a charge. I'm going to remove this battery and save it. The rest will go into my junk box. So there we go. I'm glad I had that experience, even though it became junk in the end. And that battery will hopefully help fix up some other device for a future video. The next device is something I've always wanted to make a video about. It's a Sony Milo, which is short for My Life Online. This is a beautiful example of a Sony product. It's got an appealing design aesthetic. It's a weird little thing, and it even has a slide-out keyboard. And while it's made of plastic, it feels really solid. The slide-out keyboard has a really nice snap to it. I must say, it's very satisfying to hold and use. But what is this thing, and what is it for? The Milo was first released in 2006, and its main intended function was a pocket instant messaging device. This came out in the years after the text messaging revolution of the early 2000s. Sony decided to experiment in this category with a new product. But it wasn't just text messaging. This thing could also do Skype calls. There's an inbuilt earpiece and a microphone, which makes this very useful for making voice calls like a phone. But make no mistake, this is not a phone. It only has Wi-Fi connectivity. There are some other functions as well. There's a built-in web browser for surfing the internet in 2006. And there's an MP3 player with a built-in memory stick slot for storage. But looking at that headset port, I don't think I'm going to be able to plug any of my headphones into that. This can also do video playback, and there's a text editor for taking notes, which is a good idea for something with a slide-out keyboard. But the question I have is, did anybody really buy and use this thing? Some people must have, because Sony released a second model, which had a bigger screen and a flatter, slimmer design. But it had basically the same functionality. While I really like this thing, I still find it all a bit puzzling. But the most interesting aspect for me is that this device runs Linux. This is running a version of Qtopia Linux with a custom user interface. But the problem is that this was aimed solely as a consumer product. You don't get any access to the operating system. There's no way to add any software or installable apps. Running on Linux means, of course, Sony were required to release some of their source code, which they did offer for download on their website, but that's all now long gone. There was also a dedicated Milo users forum with what seems like a strong user base, but that's now completely gone as well. In fact, it seems like it's been gone since at least 2010. This device had a very short life cycle and disappeared completely once smartphones arrived. I've been digging around everywhere to see if there was any modding or system hacks available for this device. And even though it runs Linux, there doesn't seem to be much at all. There's a few remnants here and there. Some people were able to gain access to the internal file system over Wi-Fi, with the root password just being Qtopia. There's even mention of some modded system files that could be uploaded, but what they did, I don't know, and unfortunately, they are now long gone. To Sony, I'm asking you to respect your legacy and release some support files after you've obsoleted a product, so your fans and users can continue to enjoy them. You've done similar things in the past by allowing some of your Xperia phones to have their bootloaders unlocked, so why not do some similar things for some of your other products, especially ones that run open source operating systems? My Milo appears to have the original Japanese firmware, version 1.000. There are firmware upgrade files still available today, and I could probably install an English firmware if I tried. But from what I understand, I would probably lose access to that internal file system over Wi-Fi exploit, so I'm not going to do that. It's also time I learned to read some Japanese characters. Thank you to everyone who's been suggesting I do this. Unless I find anything further with my Milo, those clips may be the only time this device appears on this channel. But there's always the possibility of future cameos with any device. For example, I want to take this opportunity to do some error correction on something that has appeared previously. In August of 2024, I made a video called The Birth of the Custom ROM. It's about an awesome phone with some spectacular modding capabilities. In that video, I speculated about other devices that could in theory run Doom, but no one had made ports for. and I showed a clip from an earlier video of the Hewlett-Packard 200LX, a DOS palmtop computer from the early 90s. Since saying that, I found out there is a port of Doom that's compatible. It came out early last year, and it's compatible with the 286 and even the 8088 CPU. So I immediately broke out the 200LX to try this on. This is a playable version of Doom, depending on your definition of playable, of course. I'm defining playable here as the game can be played if you're willing to play at a frame rate of between 2 and 4 FPS. There's also another more minimal version of Doom that plays itself and runs as a time demo. And there's yet another even more minimal demo version that's compatible with the 95LX, an earlier model of this palmtop. It uses a 2-color mode instead of grayscale, and there's no status bar, but that frame rate is a happening thing. As I'm making this video, this channel has reached 100,000 subscribers. I consider this quite an honour that so many people have chosen to follow this channel on its journey through technology. I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's been watching over the years. Thank you for sticking with me as I stumble around from device to device and subject to subject. If you found this channel in more recent times, then welcome and thank you for being here. I hope you continue enjoying what you see. Plus, you have an advantage of being able to explore the back catalogue as well. Or if you watch these videos without subscribing, that's fine too. Everyone is welcome, and I appreciate you regardless of how you choose to interact with YouTube. You can skip ads or mute or block them. It's all good. If you find a way that works best for you to give some support, then awesome, thank you. I make these videos to be an adventure. I want to come back to them in the future and, like music, get caught up again in their flow. That's the kind of experience I want to leave behind with this channel. Which brings me up to the present moment. This is the first video of 2025. I've begun lining up a set of devices and interesting things to make videos about, but it's rare that anything goes to plan around here. It always depends on what can be fixed and what story comes out of them. I'm also not sure of what order videos will be made as I make several at a time. But anyway, let's have a quick peek at some of the things that I would like to see happen this year. First, there's some game consoles that I want to check out. For example, I recently bought some batteries for my Sony Pocket Station and powered it up for the first time. This is technically Sony's first portable gaming console. It's also their smallest, but it's not really intended to be an independent device. It was more intended to be a deluxe memory card accessory for the PlayStation 1. It's got mega fat pixels and a very coarse resolution, no backlight, and can be a challenge to record the display on camera. To make a video about the Pocket Station, I will have to also spin up a PlayStation 1 and get the CD drive to read discs. But this is something I'm very curious about and would love to make a video on. That's just the beginning for Sony consoles. I'd also like to explore some more Nintendo handhelds. I have in the past hard-modded a power switch into my Switch in a previous video. Also, a long time ago I fixed a DS, but with Nintendo there are many more consoles to explore. Nintendo are by far some of the most explored handheld devices in the world, which makes for quite a challenge to say something new or interesting about them. But there are still a few lesser-known nooks and crannies about Nintendo that really interest me. So I'm hoping, for example, to see a Game Boy Color video coming this year. So far though, the challenge of simply recording the non-backlit display on the GBC has been a huge hurdle. But I think there might be a solution to that also satisfies my curiosity, so let's see what happens there. I would also like to see 2025 be the year I make my first video about the mini-disc format. I've been making videos for almost 7 years now, and I'm still yet to even make my first mini-disc video. A big part of this challenge has been dealing with all the broken mini-disc recorders I've got and that I've tried to fix over the years, but failed to get anywhere with. Well, I'm hoping that 2025 is the year that changes. For mini-disc and for lots of other yet unseen devices on this channel. Please keep sharing your thoughts in the comments. I get a lot of ideas and a huge amount of motivation from reading the things you say. I can't reply to everyone, but I'm still keeping up with reading every comment. I don't know exactly what will happen this year, but I know it will be fun. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one.